Well, hello and welcome to the Moving Forward podcast presented by Deer Brook Consulting and Higher Ed BPO. I'm your host today, Ande Smith, the president of Deer Brook Consulting. And with me is Greg Theisen, who has held a number of roles in the higher ed space, including implementing the Anthology products and working for the former Anthology company. Greg, thanks for being here with us today.
Good to be here, Andy. Thank you.
This is the second in our series. We had an earlier one with Hope Jacobson from Deer Brook Consulting, who leads our higher ed implementation practice. And Greg kindly joins us again to talk about some of the issues faced by companies who have invested and are part of the formerly known as Anthology ecosystem, particularly those with the student information system, Anthology Student, and its ERP or Anthology Finance. So Greg, just for those who didn't catch the first one yet or maybe haven't caught up on it, tell us a little bit about your background, how it touches your work at touching around the former Anthology products.
Yeah, so I actually spent several years at Ellucian as well.
Yeah.
I was in managed services. I was at Mercy University, Fordham, and Yeshiva in their managed services. Was at CITO at Mercy College. Post University. Many of you that are listening to the podcast, I probably was a reference for Anthology when I was at Post. That's actually how I got to know Andy. We implemented a large number of the Anthology products. Did it very, very rapidly. We actually, in parallel, did Anthology Student, Anthology Finance, and then Nexus CRM. So we signed the agreements in December and went live with Finance in June, Student in September, and CRM in December. Didn't realize how crazy that was. A little more gray from that, but it was very rapid. And then I went to Anthology after we completed all of those implementations and managed two development teams, the integrations team, which we kind of established that. That was to integrate all the Anthology products. Also did the Illuminate team, which is their data warehouse analytics platform, and also managed cloud services. So I got firsthand, and I think the CTO, Cynthia Haney, at the time when I came in, she said, all those things you were complaining about in cloud services when you were a client, go fix.
Go fix them, friend. That's right.
Yes, and so right before I left, I left a couple days before they filed their Chapter 11. I had been managing working with AWS AI Innovation Center, a solution to speed up the implementation cycle. Unfortunately, they went to Chapter 11, and that initiative got stalled. We had started to implement that on live customers and thought we could cut a 3-year implementation down to under a year, and it was proving out. Well, hopefully, Ellucian will resurrect that for their entire product suite, but a lot of you folks that are listening to this call, we've all gone through that pain of implementation.
Yeah, no doubt. And, that's why I'm excited to talk a little bit about people's options. For those who may not have met me, I was one of Greg's references supporting the Maine Community College system. And like Greg, we did a rapid implementation there. Deer Brook supported the colleges of 7 colleges. And I think uniquely, we placed 7 colleges into one instance of Anthology Student and one instance of the finance platform, brought 7 independent colleges together in one house, which makes it that much more fun in an implementation with independent colleges. And like Greg, we did it not quite as quick, but we did it pretty fast. I think by the time Anthology marshaled its resources, we probably went live in student finance and a couple other products, the Reachply admissions product in about 18 months of dedicated work, and that's bringing 7 colleges into one. So no loss of respect for the speed of action. So Greg, well, here's what I was thinking. You guys, you and Hope, when you talked a little bit before, kind of went through the big decision points that people are at and could think about, and it was a great podcast. It's worth folks taking a listen to, but I want to drill down today a little bit on some of the use cases. Anthology products were taken over by Ellucian, particularly the SIS and the ERP, and so people find themselves in different states, right? That wasn't something you could plan around, right, based on where you're at. So there are people who were in, and we're aware we work with one group that was right at UAT, so they were right at the cusp of getting ready to go live. We've seen customers and clients who are just in that optimization and stabilization phase, cleaning up from the implementation, learning as they've gone about, oh, now I know how it works. I wish I'd done things a little differently. And then others that are a little further along, like your former folks at Post who've gone through it, been there in a more stable place, and are looking out into the future and wondering what it holds. Let's start with the people who are on the cusp of it, right? They're in implementation somewhere down the line, and they're getting close to it. You know, putting your CIO, CTO hat on, what would be your first thoughts around that scenario? Like, I'm so in, but now what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always concerned about, the people in the equation when you're doing an implementation and when you have this kind of transition. And I think my conversations with my CSM and my implementation project lead is, there's a continuity in those people. Are they still there? Because that could impact your solution, your time to go live, after going live. And my understanding is a lot of those people are still present. Professional services was cut back quite a bit at Ellucian, but is your team still in place? That would be front and center, because that increases the risk if they're not. Those are the people that have spent a year or two. They know your data. Typically when you go live with the product, they don't implement every feature. They want to get a couple cycles or terms or semesters through with clean data before they go heavily on financial aid automation, things like that.
Right.
So that would be my real concern: is this going to delay my go live? Because you at the institution, you've got, you've drilled into the heads of all your administrators that this is our target date. Right.
It's awful disappointing if you go backwards on that, for sure.
Well, they're all fatigued. I mean, it's really difficult. When you start to go 2 to 3 years, the fatigue level amongst the institution is extremely high. And what you see frequently at least from the Anthology side, is people are giving you lip service on UATs versus the reality of doing the thorough testing. The first couple, ETL cycles, everybody's gung ho in their testing, but when you get to 2-3 years in, people are tired. So that would be because it's equally as important that you keep your institutional team in place and focused to have a successful go live.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've seen that in a couple of, I've done, like you, I've been part of ERP and big SaaS deployments even outside of higher ed, and that's true no matter what industry you're looking in. And I think in higher ed it's even worse, because the longevity and the cycle of change for people isn't typically as high as you'd find in some private sector places that I've been a part of, or even in state government. But I think you're absolutely right. And for me, if I was fortunate, Maine's going to be in the second case where we've spent a lot of time with them with Anthology, having come through the implementation. But if I'm more than a little bit into it, I'm thinking, one, my people are it's all about the people, and not only the marshaling work, the preparation work, the training, the investment work. It is the level of effort that they go in to stop and throw that work away and then say, well, we're going to start all over again and do it all over again. That's a big burden on people's psychology. It's on their time, and it's going to be on their motivation to go through and give, just like you talked about, right? That first couple ETLs where they're testing hard, but they're keeping the lights on, they're enthusiastic still. Man, how do you get that back? And it's really hard to know that. You're balancing that, as you pointed out, I think, with knowledge about, what's the future of the platform, and Ellucian has said, I think, the right words about they're going to support the product, and it bears, I think you guys talked about it in the first podcast, some really insightful questions to ask. But all else being equal, if you believe there's a reasonable chance that the product's going to be there for you and it's going to be supported and it's going to be workable, the going back is awfully hard to contemplate from a people standpoint. I just I don't know how you'd there's risk going forward, but that people part and being successful in your alternative plan, that's a tough nut to crack for people.
And Ellucian seems to be making a serious attempt at retaining people. I mean, I've seen quite a few people leave as the transition occurred. So on the professional service side, I think they've got the people in place to complete the implementations. Once you go live, your data is never pristine when you go live, and you don't really start to realize some components of that until you start to move the student, the life cycle of that student through the system. And then you see some of your customizations may need some remediation, or you need to go back and do some corrections on some of the data. Are the people in place on the product side? It's not just the implementation, the professional services team, but we couldn't register this class of student or do financial aid for this class of student. We need to go make a correction, and this is occurring after you've gone live. Who's in place over there as well. And again, these are conversations you need to have with your CSM to say, what's my escalation process? Who's on the development team? Who's on the product management team that we can have conversations with? I think that's equally important right after you go live.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. And I do think this is a place where you hedge, shamelessly, I'd say, both from Deer Brook and the higher ed BPO perspective, having talented former anthologists on our teams, having been there and done that, because I do find in many cases implementations are thin on the kind of supports to the colleges to get them through, and that takes all the burden on them. I think there are places to look to make sure you can hedge those bets on what you need from Anthology by looking for resources that have been there and done that and can help guide you through. I think I'd like to think in the cases where you've worked, that's been the case, and those kinds of perspectives are invaluable as you're looking to mitigate that risk. And again, if you value or put value on what is the transaction cost for my people, I think that's a place where you're going to have to invest, and it's a place that, frankly, people underinvested in the first instance. But Greg, let's turn to the I guess what I call it the main scenario, right? About a year into go live, got through those milestones, all the heartache that comes from discovering your data wasn't pristine. The migration may not have been as good as you'd like. You made choices about configuring the platforms and setting up processes that you thought were going to make the system work kind of like it used to, but you realize that now that you know it a little better, you wish you had made some other choices, and you need to go back and revisit that. You basically now know the unknowable a year or two before of how it should have been set up. Where do you see, what questions, as you're coming into that gate in that view, where is it that you're putting emphasis or places you see risk, I should say, in working with your Ellucian team going forward amidst this uncertainty?
Well, years ago at Anthology, we had asked, can Anthology bring the Golf Pro to the table and help us,
Right.
optimize the solution? And they really couldn't, right? They brought some people that knew some of the functionality. And you as an institution, when asked the question is, what do you want to get out of this? You tend to refer back to the previous system that you hated and got away from. Well, as you said, Andy, that now that you're in the system, you've got your data, you can begin to visualize the Anthology solution, Anthology Student. Now, I don't know what they're going to call it. It's not Ellucian Student, but Anthology Student for now. You can visualize the solution with your data, and it's time to know now to bring somebody in, that Golf Pro, and say, here are some bad habits. You have some new decisions you can make. Here's some efficiencies you can get out of the solution. And here's the change management you need to do across your institution. And so I think, I'm not, it's a good question for Ellucian is, do you have those people that can do that fine tuning? If not, then you want to find a good partner. And, I was very quick at post-university to bring in, they weren't higher ed BPO, it was Anthology professional services folks that I brought in to help me, keep my sanity and do, daily, basically daily checks of the infrastructure and come up with some time savings across the institution. So I think a year in is the optimal time. You have data, you've run a couple semester cycles in the system to look for opportunity to really leverage your investment. And, whether Ellucian can do that, whether they even want to do that is a big question mark in my mind. But there are good partners out there that definitely can step in and help you in that area. And Deer Brook and Higher Ed BPO both have experience in this area. They, as you said, they have ex-Anthology folks that did this at one point. And I think this is an opportune time to do it. I think that 1 year in is a good sweet spot, because I guarantee you're not leveraging all the value out of the solution that you could.
No, it's like it's what that they talk about that game. I think it's called Go, right? Second to learn, a lifetime to master. And any SaaS platform, ERP platform is like that, right? You're always learning. Like, I wish it could do this, until somebody says, "Well, yeah, it can. Let me show you." And the light bulb comes on. I think the good news for now, for people who are in this position, is that, and this is my personal experience, is that the Anthology, both the professional services people, what they were calling their hypercare team, the product people behind the scenes, largely intact. And those people continue to work and do good work and help out. So I think, perhaps going back to the earlier equation, like, what's going to be there when I get there? I'd say you're going to get there and you're going to find many of the same people you've been working with. You'll know now, those people are around, and they're there to help. But it is a fundamental challenge, and it wasn't unique to Anthology. I've seen it in just about every, large SaaS platform I've ever touched, in higher ed, now to higher ed, that people come in and they ask the question you asked, like, well, how should I set it up? And the answer back is, well, how do you want to set it up? And it's that filling of that space that is so hard. And it is at that first year point that you really got to start wrapping your head around, here's the right way to do it. And as you point out, there are many partners out there, but it is the time where I think you have to start looking outside of the Anthology house, former Anthology house. They have some knowledge of it, and some of them have done it so many times they do know all the tricks. But it's also business process design, change management, and optimization activities that are really focused on your business and being able to look outside of just the way, a group of people have done it forever. Some organizations are more aligned to that, I find, and have the capability organically to ask those questions. Some go hire, transformational staff that lead them through it. Others use, more consultative partners. So there are many paths to that. But I think the good news is that from what we see from talking to our clients is that they're still there and they're still working hard and they still care about the product and about you. I think they feel some uncertainty, but the help is there. But I think it is time where you got to make sure you're making sure you're making the right investments, particularly if you're going to stay there, which kind of brings us to the last piece. And I would say before we move on, that idea of filling this year, just a year in, you also have to make that same calculus, right? Is it going to evaporate on me somehow, or am I going to be disappointed with the product and get stuck with it? As you pointed out, Ellucian has said the right things, that they're there to protect the product and make sure that it's updated. But, you very similar in my view to the pain. If you're a year in, it hasn't really gone. It's still lingering in the back of your mind about how hard it was to implement. And for me, it's almost unimaginable going back and starting that all over just when you've kind of got over the finish line and kind of getting a breath of air. Have you ever seen anybody make that kind of pivot away in your days, Greg?
There were people that came to Anthology Student because they failed on other implementations with other companies.
Yeah.
And so, they didn't make the decision after going live. They made the decision a year in, 2 years in, because they failed to implement.
Yep.
And so I've not seen too many people that once they've gone live, they took a sigh of relief. We're able to operate our business, our university. As we said earlier, I think you would be, if you're a CIO, you're going to be escorted out of the building if you propose that, right? And
To the mental
so
institution, maybe, but I don't know.
yeah, yeah, I think that's a really challenging decision. And then the investment, if you just spent a ton of money to implementation costs, and you're now proposing to your institution that could be strapped already another significant expense to do that migration. I think it's more in that wait and see and try to optimize what you have. And then on the risk side too is you look at Ellucian. I think this is their fifth SIS they have now, at least four. And then from Anthology Student, there are four modalities for student: on-prem, hosted, enterprise, and multi-tenant. So Ellucian has some serious decisions to make. Do they want to continue to operate 4 or 5 SIS? Do they want to start collapsing some of the modalities? There were customers that were on-prem that were days away from going to enterprise in the cloud, and Anthology went into Chapter 11, so they stopped. Okay, where is that going to go? When I was leading cloud services, we were doing a hard push to move the hosted clients, the CNET clients, into the multi-tenant. And the multi-tenant and enterprise customers had features and capabilities that the on-prem and CNET customers didn't have. And so I think from a modernization perspective, maybe Ellucian only puts their investment in their roadmap in the future into the multi-tenant and enterprise customers. And so you're going to get further and further left behind on some of those modalities. And whether you bring in higher ed BPO and Deer Brook to help you do that transition, or does Ellucian still have the people capable of making that transition? Are all questions. I think you pretty much have a couple of years to figure that out. We were moving down the path of, do we end of life some of those other modalities? Again, I don't think Ellucian has figured this out yet, but it's got to be on their mind, because it's significant cost for them to continue to maintain 5 SIS and 4 modalities for student. And even Banner has multiple modalities as well.
Right. It's not a new problem. It's not really even unique to this circumstance.
Yeah.
It's something Anthology, if it were still freestanding, it would be grappling with. Which kind of brings us, I think, leads us into that kind of third situation, and it's a smaller pool of people who are in I'd say, the more advanced SAS 2 or SAS 1.0 kind of offerings. And they've been there a while, and that would have been your former school post. You would be in a place where I've slayed the dragons. I've got a pretty good handle on things. Maybe I've got a clear vision, a roadmap for how I want to continue to do enhancements. You've been putting in the ideas, I think they call them, or those enhancement requests, good ideas that would make the product better. Maybe you don't remember, or you only remember in the academic sense a little bit the pain of doing a transformation, but it's still not something it's the most fun no one ever wants to have again. So how do you see that risk calculus for people then, in terms of investing in the platform themselves and thinking about, do I go early or do I go late? If I wanted to make a change, or do I stay the course, right? That's the 3 forks in the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think the roadmaps that you've seen from Anthology Student after they went to Ellucian, they did a webinar, and I think a lot of that in the roadmap was already in play prior to the transition.
Yep.
And so I would say see over the next 1 or 2 quarters, are you seeing some additional items on the roadmap, especially around the use of AI? Things like AI registration, things like that. Where are they going with that? I think I would begin and seriously look at a shadow RFI. And let's look at the landscape. I mean, I was brainstorming with somebody the other day, is if you're a non-traditional term structure, overlapping terms, daily starts, things like that, what are your alternatives out there? There are quite a few startups that are trying to get into that space. But if you're an institution with 100,000, 200,000 students on Anthology Student, there's a huge risk. I've done this a couple times. When I was at Ellucian at Mercer University, we were customer number 6 into the cloud for them. Right? I think when I was at Post University with Anthology, I think we were customer number 5 or 6 into enterprise, Cloud One. And so I've suffered the pain of being those early adopters. So if you're looking at other vendors out there and you're a large institution, we used to ask the question, or I did as a CIO, is do you have a reference that is comparable to us? Well, Anthology, Post was 5,000 students when I joined. We were 28,000 students after implementing the solution, and I left. Right? And there are much larger customers on Anthology Student now, over 100,000, students, things like that. So a lot of the up and coming players, are they ready? But I would do that shadow RFI and figure out when are they going to be ready.
I think that's really important. The way I think about that is if you're there and you're, still doing some optimization work, or you're more or less looking to your, getting the value out of it. I think there are a couple of things. It's always good to keep your head on a swivel, but I think that right now, one is you should never really let up on making sure. I view the world in a people-centered way. You should never let up making sure your people have the tools to do their job and that they, things work easily. So much like we were joking about the, minute to learn, a lifetime to master, I think there are always optimization activities that can go on as you look to lean your business, as you find that there are retirements, maybe realignments around your business that are going to allow you to do things a little differently. You have to always keep that in mind. And I'm interested in your perspective on this point. One of the I'd say the attractive features of Anthology was and still is building on that Azure stack, and to the extent that finance is built in Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, D365 F&O. Microsoft doesn't have the best AI, but it builds it right in, and over time we're seeing that it's leaning towards leveraging the platforms like Claude that people really are liking to see. That AI is built right in there, and while productized AI, right, is attractive to people because they don't have to figure out kind of how to use it, it's already right there. So as I think about looking to the future, assuming that the product is reasonably supported by Ellucian, you've got tremendous opportunities to rend efficiencies and homebrew self-access data and analytics right there. I mean, it's sitting right there for you, and Microsoft's not going to stop putting money into its Copilot offerings. What are you seeing around that, or what are you thinking around that?
Well, it's interesting is when I was at Post, we were effectively building Illuminate ourselves. We were starting to use Microsoft Fabric to do replication of Anthology Student data into our own tenant, as well as Nexus CRM and Finance and Operations. And we're, again, starting to build our own operational insight, kind of capability, and right before I left Anthology with Illuminate, Illuminate was beginning to ingest reach data. It originally was Blackboard, but also student data. Now with the new company, Illuminate went with Blackboard. So, I'm not quite sure what the future of Illuminate, but the technologies out there to do that yourself is getting cheaper. And to your point, Andy, the tools in Microsoft, and even Blackboard was using, Microsoft AI in an AWS environment. So I think what you're seeing in the AI world, it's what model and what platform you use is going to become a little bit more interchangeable, and so it's really about the ease of moving data, and whether you need real-time data. And since Anthology Student is in Azure, it just makes sense for you to build that out and look at your entire enterprise and the data, and how do you get them into a useful state. And I think the power of together, which was a great idea at Anthology, is no longer the power of together. And so I think you begin to assess, to your point, Andy, is the power of together is knowledge of that data, of that entire student life cycle from lead all the way through alumni. Can I get that into a useful form? And I think the tools you're seeing now with the big providers, AWS and Microsoft and Google, is making that easier. Right.
Yeah, I
And
think
so,
that's right. I mean, there's so much opportunity with that. I find, again, if you're in the use case we're talking about, you're down the road, right, and you're sitting there looking at it, there's a lot of opportunity for you. And I don't think you've got to be particularly sophisticated or have particularly, it seems daunting to people who are unfamiliar with it, I guess is the point I'd make. But it isn't actually a huge leap to start leveraging AI to get real actionable intelligence. And again, I think it's undervalued that Microsoft Power BI is native to it. It's into, what Microsoft's investment is that most people I don't think appreciate is how interwoven those kinds of tools are into the fabric of the data and their ability to do things elegantly, low computational loading, all the things that people want. They're just not quite sure how to get there. And again, I think if you're in that platform and you can sustain and you can make your life, the life of your people better, this is yet another way that you're going to be able to get huge return on your investment without looking elsewhere and starting over or going into, proprietary stack that the technology may be robust, but you're going to have, I think a Salesforce or a Workday, right? Those are, you're buying an ecosystem that is not generalizable in the way that Microsoft is more ubiquitous. So it's
and with Illuminate, we had implemented a natural language query, so you're having a conversation with the data. And the use case I can think of always that was, I remember when I was hired at Post, I asked the CEO, what's your nirvana? What are you looking for? He goes, I'd like to know whether this program or this class is profitable. And my last board presentation at Post was a mic drop. And I said, there's your Power BI report where you can do your analysis on whether, which programs are profitable and which are not. And what do we have to do from a lead generation perspective to make it profitable? Yeah. And I think to your point is with Power BI and Copilot, if you build the back end correctly, your administration and academic staff are basically having a conversation with the data. And Microsoft has built out that ecosystem to allow you to do that. And working with partners that understand the data. And if you go to somebody, again, one of my favorite questions always when talking to presidents is how many students do you have? And if I ask the president, he'll give me one answer. If I ask the CFO, they'll give me a different answer. If I ask the VP of enrollment, they'll give me a third answer. And so, again, if you do this right, they can all have their answers, and you've defined it so that they know this is a president's view, this is a CFO's view, this is the VP of enrollment's view, and it's on that. You don't have to be a data scientist in the administration to query the data. And that's what we're moving towards. That's what the AI is enabling is for you to have that conversation with the data. It's just you have to build a base foundation to do that correctly.
And that's why I get excited about this. Again, for all SaaS, particularly large scale SaaS that support enterprise utility like student information systems, like ERPs, Dynamics. They're tailor-made that way. And I think the ability to master that taxonomy is accessible without hiring an army of developers who have some inscrutable knowledge to at least get you up on the rails there. And I think that factors in, I guess it factors into all three phases, that even where Anthology sits, and again, if you tap the I believe button, as Ellucian said, that they're going to support that product in the go forward for some period of time that's not forever maybe, but it may be forever. It's as forever as any software package might be in terms of its utility. Those tools are there and they're built in, even if they're not haven't been exploited or prettied up, like planted like flowers. The seeds are in there, and they're going to sprout for you if you know how to tend to them. And I think that's accessible. So that it goes into all three of those considerations for me. If I'm thinking about, where I want to be, and again, balancing it against the heartache of data migration and data cleansing, and particularly moving it. The last thing you'd say on data migration, it's always hard. It always is a tragically difficult process. But those who've gone into Anthology's product know they've gone from student-centered to enrollment-centered kind of data structures, and now you're going to go the other way. So getting back out, woo, I don't think that's been done a lot, and that ain't going to be fun.
Well, also too is if you go that direction today, you don't have the staffing or the resources to really begin to leverage, AI and advanced reporting, analytics, and these sort of things, because again, you're going back and resetting to a new implementation. And so, again, if you've just implemented and gone live, you're thinking about what's our future, what are the capabilities. Well, if you're starting over again, you're delaying that. I think institutions really understanding your students. I'm not necessarily the expert in this area, but if you're looking at AI as it applies to learning, you focus on that area, and the administrative and the student experience. You hope you're kind of past that, the worst of it, right? And now begin to leverage the platform and begin to look at other things. Higher ed's changing very quickly. I think they have about 2 years to really get up to speed in some of these areas, and you really have to put your energy in some of this stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. And you made a great point earlier too, particularly if you're in that, I'm in a sustain modality with incremental improvements, is where is the market at? And if you're not in a hurry, right, you don't have some external driver other than fear, which is never the basis of making good decisions. The market's evolving. There are a lot of new players coming into the market offering different things. They're building cloud native. So there's a future place where you want that to mature more.
Yes.
I think, and again, that's where I get excited. I continue to get excited about those anthology products and their linkage to Microsoft and the knitting in architecturally that Microsoft has invested in the Power Platform and the Dataverse and all those things. Those provide a unique capability of extending beyond, frankly, what the product itself might have been developed to do for you.
I think to reemphasize that point is if you make the decision to go with a SIS provider that's in Microsoft, you have that entire Microsoft ecosystem to leverage, right? And so Microsoft has come out with some new, Copilot Works, things like this that are tapping into that Microsoft graph, the Microsoft ecosystem that myself, I'm just learning how to leverage that, but it knows my data footprint in 365. And can we extend, the Anthology Student into that ecosystem? Yeah, you can. Yeah. Right. And so I just think the landscape here and your knowledge and your ability to service your students is going to change. And, back when I implemented at Post, it was, speed to lead, speed to enrollment, speed to registration, speed to, butt in seat, speed to graduation, we just kept moving the bar. How can we improve the student experience? And these sort of ecosystems and capabilities, really get you with it. And it goes back to that power of together Anthology, which I thought was a great idea, is it made that ecosystem and that journey through the life cycle of the student easier because Anthology was thinking that way. Now I'm having to reset and go, okay, we've got multiple vendors now providing all these different pieces. Well, now I have to go back to where I was thinking is I need to build that data platform, that data ecosystem myself. Maybe Ellucian will get there one day or somebody else will get there. It's always cheaper to buy than it is to build, right? And
well, that's the historical truth. I think that's in this discussion of AI, there's some opportunity, I think, to get there quicker. And I think that's the importance of the right partners, right? People who understand how it's built, how it's put together to help you navigate that. There are organizations that have the scale and the depth of knowledge, or they have a unicorn that's there who can just make it all happen. But
Well, you're not going to throw Ellucian in the room with a somewhat competing vendor to have the integration or data migration conversation. If you don't have the skills on campus, you need to bring in a partner that will represent you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, that was the challenge before. I mean, before Anthology owned Blackboard, trying to migrate data or bring data between Blackboard and campus management student at the time was a challenge because they barely talked to each other. Well, we're kind of back into that world again. And some of the people on the call probably have Canvas or D2L or these other learning platforms, and they already know this pain, right? And I think you're adding the data component into it and AI, and I think picking partners is very important. People that know the higher ed journey, I think, is important.
Yeah, how you leverage those tools that you have there, I think, in that sustainment and extension mode is it's huge that way. So, Greg, I think we about run our course for these three topics. I believe we've got some podcasts coming up as well, but I really appreciate your being here and taking some time to chat with me. I enjoyed the insights and hope folks who choose to listen in enjoyed them as well and found them useful. Our contact information is associated with the podcast. You can reach out to either of us, Deer Brook or Higher Ed BPO. Bring some pros to help you answer some of these questions, or if you're stuck in a conundrum, help you move right on past that blocker and get on the road to happiness and give your people some relief from some of the technology challenges they may face. So, Greg, thank you very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And folks who joined us, I hope you have a great day as well, and we'll look forward to talking with you later.
Thank you, everybody.